individuals as well, and they may not always be aware that you're processing that information. You may be what is referred to as a processor, and your customer may be sending you PII about their own customers. And so now you're indirectly ingesting information about different data subjects. So a good data inventory starts with identifying those data subjects and all attributes about them. So first of all, the data elements. What are you collecting about them? Are you collecting just the name and address? Are you collecting a personal email address? And what kind of categories of PII? Is it sensitive information? Is it confidential? And you need to very clearly delineate this information as well. And when you start thinking about what you're collecting, also determine, am I collecting more than needs to be collected? Because another aspect of a privacy program is data minimization. Do not collect more information than you need. If you only need someone's name and email address to help them, when you provide a service for them, help them out, don't start collecting now their cell phone number if you don't need that. So really keep it at a minimum. Now, the why. Why are you collecting this information? Have you documented consent very clearly so that it's auditable if it's ever challenged? Like, I never gave you consent. Why are you collecting the information? You can point to, well, you actively clicked a box. It wasn't checked ahead of time because you don't want those pre-checked boxes on this date and this time, and you gave us permission to collect information about you. Legal basis, this is a term that was really introduced through the GDPR, but are you collecting the information to provide a service to that individual? Are you marketing to that person and they've given you permission to do so? Are you fulfilling a contract, et cetera? So there are ways of documenting that, and that you need to be very clear about the legal basis, the why you are collecting the information. And where are these individuals? We've talked about cross-border transfers a little bit, but first of all, where's the location of the data you've been collecting? And then also the location of the data subjects. Now, I've mentioned the GDPR from the EU a little bit. That has to do with EU residency, not citizens, but where do these individuals actually reside? Same thing with the US privacy laws. Where is an individual residing? Are they a Virginia resident? Well, the Virginia law would be applying to them. And same thing with California of the CCPA. So really determine where the data subjects are. And then how are you processing this information? Are you collecting it through your own systems? Are you receiving this information through a data transfer? Is there an API, some sort of integration with another third party? This is another way to document that. And also protection. This is where your security controls are jumping in. If you are working with a third party, and we'll talk about that a little bit here, make sure that they have appropriate security controls in place as well, just as you presumably do. And then, of course, is the data encrypted as it needs to be? The appropriate controls really need to be in place. So again, those conversations with the security team should be early and often. And then finally, data retention. I'll be talking about this a little bit in the other slides as well. But again, with the spirit of data minimization, are you keeping these records longer than you need to? Now, certain business processes, finance, HR, et cetera, they're already following pretty strict rules, the 7-year requirement, et cetera. But other business processes may not be doing that. And invariably, when I conduct these data inventories, I'm going to say about 80% of the time, when I ask the question, how long are you keeping the information, I get indefinitely, which isn't a horrible thing, but we need to now analyze that a little further. Why are you keeping it? What are the risks now of keeping the data longer than you need to? You're certainly increasing your risk profile when it comes to information security. All of a sudden, that target just got that much bigger than what it maybe should have been if data had been deleted following a good data retention schedule. And this is the other thing. Most organizations have a data retention schedule. Most employees don't know what it is or how to follow it or does it apply to them. And then actually the deletion process itself is very often very cumbersome. So all of that needs to be streamlined. And also, let's keep in mind that delete doesn't always mean delete. when you hit delete on a record. It might just be marked for deletion. That's not sufficient when it comes to complying with privacy regulations. So data retention, data deletion is a pretty big subject and needs some scrutiny. The other requirement in many of these laws, and again, the NIST framework as well, is conducting privacy risk assessments on higher risk business processes. Now, what's higher risk? That's not always clearly defined, but higher volume, certainly. And of course, if you're collecting any health information, sensitive information, criminal records, that kind of thing, those are definitely higher risk. Any information on children, and you need to conduct a specific risk assessment through the privacy lens on those business processes as well. And that, of course, piggybacks on this beautiful data inventory you've just created. Now, when you've been documenting the data inventory, you should have also been documenting any third parties you've been working with. So I really start to assess those relationships with the service providers and your own data processors. Do they have appropriate security in place? That should have shown up in a security assessment, which I hope you've been doing anyway on your third parties. And then also have your contracts. Do they have appropriate privacy language in place? Many times you have relationships that have been ongoing many, many years. It's time to probably review that contract, work with your in-house counsel or your outside counsel, take a look at those contracts and make sure that the appropriate language is there to protect you. Also, the data processing agreement, you'll see data protection agreement, you'll see DPA defined in a couple of different ways, but this has been showing up in certainly the US regulations, specifically Virginia, that you need to have these contracts in place as well. And this is again to protect you and the entity that you're entering into an agreement with regarding how information is protected, what PII is being shared back and forth. And this is actually an opportunity for your vendor also to push back and say, hey, you're sending me more information than I need. I just gave the example of name and email address. Now, why are you also sending me their phone number or employee ID or something like that? I don't need that. I'm pushing back. And the DPA can delineate that kind of information. So that's a very important document. And again, you don't need to completely redo a contract. This can be an addendum that's included to reflect privacy. Now, another piece that we're seeing more in legislation, and as I mentioned, individual rights is a big driver for this legislation, grants individuals the data subject access ability. And so they'll submit requests, data subject access requests. You'll hear this referred to as a DSAR. We're all consumers, so we may be curious about what information a very large online retailer may have about us, because they certainly know our buying habits. So we should have the ability to reach out to them and say, this is who I am. I'd like to know what information you have about me. There may be a situation where you need to have information deleted. And then that's another, avenue for you to be able to get information about yourself. And is that request going to be honored? Now, just because someone submits a DSAR and maybe a request for deletion, that doesn't mean an organization has to immediately start deleting records. As I alluded to earlier, you may have your own audit requirements, information may be on legal hold, that kind of thing. So you have to investigate, but the data inventory is a great place to start, because now you know where you've been collecting that information. But then you need to determine, again, working with legal, if you really can delete something or there's a requirement to keep it. So in order to answer these requests, you have to create and document processing for opt-out rights and advertising and any sharing. You shouldn't be probably selling the information anyway. These laws certainly are forbidding that ability. Create a process to manage consumer rights regarding their personal information. So that means make sure you have a process to intake those requests and being able to respond to them. This is not the time to get creative. You should have probably a canned response that goes out to them, and they need to prove their identity. That doesn't mean now that they supply even more PII than you had to begin with, because that's just defeats the whole purpose here. But at least maybe they can say, we've been using this program, or this is my user ID that I use to access the service. And maybe any update, any preference center you may have, make sure that that's been updated appropriately as well. This may be a time to use e-discovery methodologies to verify the location of PII. We're seeing this more in the EU as well as in the United States, when former employees say, well, I want to know anytime you talked about me in an email. Well, you don't want to now overshare information about other individuals. So e-discovery tools may be of benefit here. And then create, as I mentioned, create the process not only to intake the requests, but also reply and disclose appropriate information to any of those consumers. Now, Virginia, again, has this call out about an appeal process. An individual, you may have to reply to them and say that I cannot delete your information because I have an audit requirement. They may not like that response. They haven't, so you have to have an appeal process in place as well if they choose to do that. And then that includes the ability of a different person basically handling their request. So all of this is documentation and training of many people in your organizations to get ready for these DSARs. And you'll start seeing them coming in, not only onesie-twosies, but also on an automated basis as well. So I've mentioned a processor. I've referenced what a controller is. Now let's kind of define it. The controller is the entity that really makes the decisions about the PII. They've taken in that PII. They have that primary relationship with the individual. They're the ones that may engage other processors, their service providers, to help deliver a solution, a service to that individual. Processors may inadvertently get a DSAR, but they shouldn't be deleting any information unless they get that in writing from the controller. And so the example, again, I give very simple, but again, HR, to manage employees, the organization is the controller. They may have outsourced certainly payroll processing, benefits, et cetera. Those organizations are all now processors. Now, continuous improvement, I won't go through this entire list, but privacy by design is a concept that was introduced several years ago, introduced in Canada, incorporated into the GDPR, and you'll see phrases around this in the various legislation that's now being introduced in the US. So proactive, not reactive. It really says, build out your programs with privacy in mind. And again, with a strong partnership with security, build it in from the very, very beginning so that consumers aren't wondering, hey, what's going on with my PII as I've now engaged in this service. And again, verify those data retention requirements are met and data destruction takes place. So this is your plan, do, check, act kind of situation where you have a data retention schedule in place. Are people really following it? Check on that. And then, of course, execute on destruction. Now, most organizations I've worked with, pushing that delete button is very challenging, and not everyone is ready to do that. So again, training needs to be involved. That risk discussion needs to be involved, but destruction really helps out the organization overall. I know everyone's in the same situation. If you give me a closet, I'll fill it. If you give me a bigger closet, no, I'll probably buy more shoes or something. But data destruction is a very important aspect of any privacy program. And then training on data classification and any other data governance practices you may have to follow as well. And then finally, I'll spend a little bit of time talking about practicing breach response, because as of course with security, you may be running tabletop exercises today. If you aren't, make sure that you start to incorporate that into your security program as well as your privacy program, of course. So with limited resources, it's so important, and I hearken back to the very beginning of my little talk about identifying what data is of value and is critical. So the security team has been asking about this for a long time. Your business resiliency team, your BCP, business continuity team, has been asking about this. And the business very often answers, well, everything's important, and I need everything back up in an hour or within a day. But this is the time for those tough discussions, whether you're talking about in the context of business resiliency, security, privacy. Really identify what is a value and what is critical to the business. So this isn't an overnight discussion. It takes time, and it takes the engagement of many different business stakeholders. So make sure your data inventories are kept up to date. Maybe you, in the past, you didn't need to collect someone's phone number. Now you do. Make sure that you update the data inventory appropriately. Maybe you swapped out one service provider for another chance to update that data inventory. So before you go into any breach response exercise, make sure all these updates have taken place. I mentioned engage your stakeholders early and often. This includes marketing. This includes communications, of course, all the business stakeholders as well. And now the annual tabletop exercise, and include a scenario with personally identifiable information, or PII. I talk to a lot of clients where their cybersecurity insurance provider is requiring the tabletop exercise. Any assessment, any framework that you're following is requiring a tabletop exercise, but make sure it's meaningful. Make sure that it's not some kind of canned script where everyone's sort of assigned responsibilities, and make sure that's not going to be of meaning if there is a real scenario. Make sure your stakeholders understand the difference between a security incident and a true legal matter, which would be a data breach. And then plan and execute that exercise. It would be great to have it in person. I know that's such a challenge nowadays. Your C-level executives, ideally, it would be great to have them at the table as well. Again, this is not the time for individuals to get creative. Your sales team, your sales leadership needs to participate in this type of exercise. The need to know basis, all of that needs to be defined. For example, internally, if there is a true legal matter, a breach, you can't have individual salespeople going, well, I know that we're going to be in the papers tomorrow. Well, not papers, online, I guess, will be clickbait tomorrow. I can't, I should be proactive and reach out to my customers and let them know what happened, what we're doing about it. This is absolutely not the time to do that. Many of you are aware. All of this needs to be scripted, approved by legal, and disseminated in the appropriate channel. So I'm spending more and more time talking about data breach response nowadays in my consulting practice. So I believe I am at time, and I don't know if I have any questions coming in. Oh, I hope. Let's see. All right. Well, I think I've concluded. I missed any. I hope you all were able to hear me and able to get some information from the presentation today. I'm available on LinkedIn. I'd be happy to connect with any of you and answer any follow-up questions. So I appreciate all of your support and interest, and it's a great organization. And let's continue to participate in it. Thank you so much.